Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is a sunny Friday, the first day of May 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, we saw a second lawsuit against the anti-sheriff bill, Senate Bill 5974. This one brought by a Kitsap County candidate for sheriff and another sheriff candidate from Asotin County, along with the Washington State Sheriff's Association, asking a judge to grant a preliminary injunction. If this sounds familiar, we had this happen on Wednesday with an entirely different lawsuit, also against Senate Bill 5974. We were in the courtroom today as those arguments went down, and the judge made a ruling. Stick around for that with some exclusive coverage in today's episode of Washington in Focus. And then, in keeping with our Law Enforcement Friday theme, I guess it is, a class action suit has been filed to block the state from raiding the Left One pension program. That is the pension program that funds law enforcement officers and firefighters. And it's a program that is no longer being funded. I should say it's closed off to new members. There's only a certain class of a lot of these folks that have since retired, some still going to retire. But during this year's legislative session, that fund was raided in part to backfill the rainy day fund, which was raided by lawmakers to fill up some of the budget gap for the supplemental budget this year. Class action lawsuit and a conversation with former King County Sheriff and former candidate for governor, Dave Reichert. I had a conversation with him and we'll share that with you. And then finally today, if you've ever been there, it was probably an afternoon or evening to remember the Tower Club at the very top of the Columbia Tower building in downtown Seattle. You might not have been there in many years. I have not either, but it is closed, shut down about a week ago. There were a couple of final banquet goings on Thursday. And my colleague Randy Diamond was there to capture some exclusive interview and conversations with some of the folks that were leaving, really kind of a symptom of what's happening in downtown Seattle right now, and a vacancy rate for some of these upper end buildings, especially, but a vacancy rate overall of 38% in this office space in downtown Seattle. So, all that coming up in today's episode. So, this morning in Thurston County Superior Court, the same judge, Judge Christine Schaller, who on Wednesday heard another challenge and a motion for a preliminary injunction to block the anti-sheriff bill from taking effect, heard another lawsuit. The one on Wednesday was the one that was filed by the 4 Eastern Washington sheriffs who were challenging basically the First Amendment issues with the bill, preventing them from maybe posting something on social media or associating with someone that perhaps the Criminal Justice Training Commission could have an issue with. Well, on Wednesday, the judge agreed there are constitutional issues with the bill, and she granted that preliminary injunction on Senate Bill 5974 for the 4 sheriffs. The case today, and we were there as the arguments went down, was brought by Kitsap County Sheriff's candidate Rick Coos and another sheriff's candidate from Asotin County, along with the Washington State Sheriff's Association. And they were challenging specifically the new requirements of the bill for candidates that say you got to be 25 years old, you got to have 5 years of law enforcement experience uninterrupted, and some other things. Well, if that is allowed to remain in place, Rick Coos and the current undersheriff in Asotin County, who's running to replace the sheriff there who's retiring, wouldn't be able to run, even file their candidacy. Next week is the filing week. So there is a real sense of urgency here. So it was a fascinating hearing. Once again, Judge Schaller was very particular in going through the issues that she has with 5974, going through the Constitution and some of the requirements for candidates, and basically saying there isn't any other candidate for office, whether you're on the local level, county level, state level, in the state, that requires such a high burden that Senate Bill 5974 is requiring of elected sheriffs. Basically said the people have a right to vote in or remove an elected sheriff should they choose, but that shouldn't be something that lawmakers with this newly crafted bill are responsible for. So here is some of what Judge Christine Schaller said as she was handing down her decision today, granting a preliminary injunction in favor of the plaintiffs.
I find that the plaintiffs clearly have a well-grounded fear of immediate evasion of their rights. If the court were not to grant a preliminary injunction, these plaintiffs would be precluded from filing for office. You can only file your declaration of candidacy during 1 week. And this year it's May 4 through 8 of 2026, and they would be precluded. And that certainly is a well-grounded fear of an invasion of their rights. I also find that being foreclosed from filing a declaration of candidacy will result in actual and substantial injury because they would be unable to participate in the election. I think the state argued that it's not an actual and substantial injury because they might be able to run in 2030 because they could be eligible potentially at that point. I do not find that persuasive. I have weighed the criteria in light of equitable factors, including balancing the relative interests of the parties and the interests of the public. There is, as was argued by the state, a significant public interest in laws being constitutional, in laws being enforced. Because again, the voters voted and chose the legislators who create these laws. That's part of our system. But there is also a significant and strong interest for the plaintiffs, again, because their remedy is such a short window. They will be precluded from exercising a fundamental right to run for elected office, and in this case, the sheriff, if the court does not issue a preliminary injunction.
So, in today's arguments in favor of the plaintiffs, you had attorney Joel Ard, who was there sitting next to sheriff's candidate Rick Coos. And then from the state AG's office, we had Freeman Hawley. And he made the arguments that this should be upheld, that this is a duly, signed into law by the governor just a month ago. There's going to be a great harm to the citizens of Washington if this bill can't be fully implemented. It was just yesterday that the law went into effect, but again, only certain provisions of it. This again is a lawsuit that's very related, and at some point we thought that it might be combined, but ultimately they were not. So again, today she granted that injunction. So I spoke just after the ruling outside the courtroom with that Kitsap County Sheriff's candidate, Rick Coos, who I should tell you, he's currently a King County Sheriff's deputy and has been since 2023 and had 20 plus years as a decorated Navy service member. But that would still not be enough under this law to allow him to file his candidacy next week. So here's what he had to say. And then next to him, Pierce County Sheriff's current sheriff, Keith Swank, who was there in the courtroom to witness today's arguments and the decision from the judge.
I didn't know what to expect going in because there was a hearing just a couple of days ago. And so knowing that this one was like completely separate and just focusing on the qualifications and talking about how unconstitutional things are happening in Washington, especially with our legislators. And it just brings back the role of the sheriff being someone that stands up and fights against those unconstitutional laws and being there. And so just being a part of the team, I guess, per se, just standing up, fighting for the voters' rights, the people's rights to decide their sheriff. So huge win for the voters today.
And onward and upward with your candidacy.
Oh yeah, I'll be filing at 8 a.m. on Monday morning at the Kitsap County Auditor's Office.
This is important because first off, I'm supporting this gentleman here for running for Kitsap County Sheriff. I met him a few months ago, and I think he's going to be a great sheriff. And for the state legislature to pass legislation to preclude somebody from running for office is such an overreach. That whole 5974 is to go after people like me to keep us from being sheriffs, to keep him from being a sheriff, to remove us from office. And I'm really glad that this injunction was filed. I felt really good about it. But look, our fight's not over with yet, right? They can appeal it straight to the state Supreme Court, and I'm worried about that court and what the rulings might be. But this judge here, very honorable. She did a great job reviewing all the constitutional rights and provisions in this, and I'm really happy about it.
Now, at the same time these arguments were taking place, I received an email from Mike Falk in the Office of the Attorney General. He's their communications director, and he sent me their filing with the state Supreme Court. That was in response to the preliminary injunction granted on Wednesday in that separate lawsuit. Today, they asked the state Supreme Court to basically stay that order, and they want this to happen right away. We'll put up part of this for you. He wrote the court, or in the, I should say, the briefing that was filed with the state Supreme Court, it said this court should stay the Superior Court's indefensible order so the law can take effect. This relief is urgent because the new law regulates eligibility for the office of county sheriff, and the filing period for sheriff candidates is May 4th through 8th, next week. Without immediate action from this court, defendants will lose any fruits of their underlying appeal. So again, they're asking for a request, a ruling by Monday, May the 4th. So even with this preliminary injunction granted in both of these lawsuits, we could still have the state Supreme Court weighing in as soon as Monday. So stay tuned for all of that action. Now to a class action suit filed on Thursday over state lawmakers raiding the pension fund for law enforcement officers and firefighters. This is the LEF 1 fund. Now, the retired first responders argue this maneuver really leaves their pension system vulnerable to like market downturns, and they believe it is wholly unconstitutional. Now, this law was signed by Governor Bob Ferguson just last month, and it terminates what supporters of the bill believe is an overfunded pension account. They say at the end of June 2029, based on this bill, that fund will basically expire. Survivors, those still receiving benefits from this pension program, will be rolled over into a different one. And they believe there's plenty of money in there, and we can take up to $4 billion from the LEF 1 pension program, backfill some of that into the rainy day fund, which they just emptied out for other budget priorities. And they don't believe there's going to be any issue with it, that everybody will still have plenty of money to receive the pension benefits that they are promised. But those pension recipients are not convinced that that's the way things are going to play out. Former King County Sheriff Dave Reichert, former candidate for governor here in the state of Washington, is also the current secretary of the LEF 1 pension fund. And I spoke with him on Thursday, and he basically said, this is so hugely disrespectful to law enforcement and firefighters who in many cases, were wounded, left with mental health issues after serving, and deserve to make sure that this fund is not raided for other priorities that lawmakers might seem, these priorities that lawmakers decide are more fitting, And in his opinion, there is nothing more important than making sure those who serve and protect us are taken care of.
The sad part of it is that, there are only about 5,500 of us left alive. And so, and the figure that I last heard is that we're losing about 8% a year. So that's only going to increase as we get older. So, if you figure 10% a year, we're going to lose 500 people a year out of 5,000. That's not too long, and we'll all be gone anyway. But what happens is there is a feeling amongst these 5,500, and they're law enforcement officers and they're firefighters and then their beneficiaries, which are usually their spouses. And they range in age from about 72 to 90 or so. And so as they raid this fund, and it's not really a surplus fund, it's more defined as a trust fund. They are creating a lot of stress for these senior citizens who have been through a lot of trauma, seen a lot of traumatic, disgusting things in their career that affected some with PTSD. Others, like myself, I've had two major back surgeries, 4 knee surgeries as a result of um, getting hit head on by some idiot in my police car back in the day. And then people just dealing with the stress. If you think about just my own personal experience of collecting um, collecting bodies, body after body after body for 9 years in Green River, or friends that have had, tried to arrest people who uh, got into a wrestling match with them and over the cliff they went, broke their back, and they're dealing with those issues still today. They don't go away. And so we're all looking at this, and I'm talking to Left One cops that I haven't talked to for a while that are reconnecting with me, which is the positive of all this. But they're all going, "What happened? We put." Gosh, I didn't mean to get emotional here, but their stories are just so sad and powerful. That is so disrespectful, is what they see. Just so disrespectful that the state, without any consultation at all, just went ahead and say, you know what? We have mismanaged our budget. And so what we're going to need to do basically is just to take money from retired cops and firefighters and their beneficiaries.
Now, the lawsuit is directed at the Office of the Attorney General and also at the Department of Retirement Systems. And both of those groups emailed very brief responses to our request for a comment. Mike Falk in A.G. Brown's office wrote, "Our office is still reviewing this filing." And then the Department of Retirement Systems responded to say, "We respect the legal process and are unable to comment while the issue is being litigated." So, not highly unusual to receive just such a brief response when there's litigation here involved. But again, this is a class action. So, you've got potentially every single one of the remaining 5,000 plus folks in the left retirement, left one retirement pension program parties to this lawsuit. So we're going to be interested to follow this for you in the weeks and the months to come. Now, I wanted to bring your attention to a story that my colleague Randy Diamond is writing an article on today. The Columbia Tower building, the top of the tower building up there on the 76th floor. If you've ever been there, it's not anything that you would forget. It's absolutely beautiful, posh place. Anybody that's got an office, especially all the attorneys, I think there's thousands of attorneys in that building. They're going to bring, a high-end client. You're going to go up and have a cocktail, an appetizer, dinner, whatever in that building. But it closed a week ago. And Randy was up there yesterday as there's really not much left. Much of the furniture was gone. But he had an opportunity to speak with some of the folks there, employees, long-term employees. Nobody was able to kind of speak on the record with him. But basically the folks, that have the lease there say it never recovered after COVID. And then you've got the 38% office vacancy rate in the city of Seattle, the highest of any large metro area in the entire country. So if you don't have the high-end clientele with their offices in the building or anywhere near, they're certainly not going to go up to the Tower Club, which is the most brilliant view you can see out across the sound over, to the islands. It's just absolutely gorgeous up there. But, it's perhaps just symptomatic of the way things are going in Seattle and perhaps something that city officials should be paying very close attention to. I don't know if they're just going to close off that whole level or what's going to happen 3 floors below that, I should say, just have to go down memory lane for a minute, was where Metro Traffic, and then it was, what was the name for it that took over? I can't recall. But that's where they had the traffic reporters. I was there for 5 years working, and it was also the observation deck. So if you ever went up there, you're aware of just how cool the view is, how iconic it is. Um, and people that we would have visitors come, from out of town would just be grateful to have an opportunity to see the view from up there. So kind of sad, really, honestly, very, very sad to see it close. And I'm sure long-term employees there are pretty bummed about it too, because I understand the tips were pretty good. So that is it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Friday, May the 1st. As always, thank you for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.